welcome to February. It is February 7th. And I was going back listening to the podcast from last week and sat there thinking, well, this is embarrassing. I introduced my grandson and got his name wrong. Go figure. I hadn't had much practice. We've been referring to him as Henry for so long, and his full name never really kind of settled in on me. So just to set the record straight, his name is Henry William Simpson, not the other way around, William Henry. That's how I introduced him last time. And we are now pretty much of a full week into his little life, and he has captured the hearts and minds of not only his parents, but his aunts and also his nephews, cousins. And they were just thrilled getting to meet him. Of course, an infant is not real exciting. I mean, when you're 6 and 4 years old, it's like, do something, and he doesn't do anything. If he does anything, it's in slow motion. So let the record show that I have corrected his name, lest anybody in my family tell me what a klutz I am. So anyway, you are listening to the Psych Monologues. I'm Dr. Ray Mitsch, your host. The Psych Monologues is a podcast that explores the intersection of faith, psychology, and spiritual formation. So pull up a chair, get comfortable, relax. Let's talk about the issues that matter to you, where you live, what you think, how you feel, about living life with others and Jesus and just life in general. So we are heading into a series. It's going to be a loosely constructed series where I want to try to tackle what spiritual formation looks like. Now, the minute I say that, in a lot of cases, people say, well, great, I'll find out how to do this. I'll get 12 easy steps to do spiritual formation, and I can get through all of those and say, there, I have now arrived. Yeah, well, I'm not much with steps or detailed plans of how. Partly because we demand steps and how and getting answers to how, because usually the reasoning behind that is because I want to do it right? And so what we forget or fail to remember is that spiritual formation is a profoundly individual experience. And there's so much of this that tempts us into doing comparisons with other people, whether that's heroes of the faith or more mature people that are around us or people that we look up to or whatever that might be. And I'm going to resist that at all costs. There's not much use to that at all. Now, I know that to some degree it leaves us feeling like we're caught in no man's land because there's no user manual. Nothing that tells me this is the way I'm supposed to do it. And you're right, it isn't, because this is all about how do I engage in my relationship with God and Jesus, and how do I engage in my relationship with other people. And there are thousands and thousands of books that are more than happy to tell you how to go about doing that. Eight quick, easy steps to having a better marriage, or whatever it is. And while those ideas are good, I'm not saying they're not. Many times they are. The problem is that they rob us of the key element of developing relationships, and that's around the issues of trust and control and how we handle each other's truth and boundaries, all the things that I tend to spend a lot of time talking about. So the series we're heading into, I want to tackle certain issues, the things that would give you a lay of the land rather than quick, easy steps to profound spiritual formation. What kinds of things do I need to cultivate in order to participate in this thing that I'm calling spiritual formation? And then secondly, what are the obstacles? There are things that get in our way. And when they do, usually we're not a fan. As a matter of fact, we typically take the lay of the land, the quick, easy steps and say, this is how it's supposed to go. If I do these things the right way, then there shouldn't be any hitches in the plan or anything like that. And so we never really count on what the obstacles will be. And they're there. They're there because we're human. They're there because we live in a world populated by people just like us. They're there because life, in a lot of cases, assaults us. You might want to call it that. I mean, we're always wrangling with reality. And in a lot of cases, most of the things that we struggle the most with is because reality doesn't negotiate. But we can fake it. We can make it look like it does and pronounce it as so, whatever the case may be, and then say, there, I'm on my way. So what I want to introduce tonight is a topic that's kind of tough, actually. It's been weighing on me for quite a while, the last few weeks. And in some respects, it has felt a little bit like a cold, wet blanket that has been placed over my experience. And when I have that kind of feeling, my propensity at one point in time was to distract, to deflect, to look for a plan, to throw myself into other activities, all of those things. At one point in time, that was very much my approach. And if you find any of those hit a target for you, there's no stones being thrown here. I as often I say, been there, done that, got the T-shirt and went home. I understand that, and I'm walking that path with anyone who finds resonance with what I'm talking about. But the topic is living with regret. And I've had a series of events that have developed in my family that in so many ways point directly at me. And that pointer at me is part of what tempts me and pushes me into regret. I wish I could have. I wish I should have. I wish I had the wisdom. I wish somebody had told me. It's all of those. And so what I want to do is I want to define my terms first so we're real clear about what it is I'm talking about. And then unpack not so much how I don't live in regret, as much as how do I live with it? And I'll explain in just a second. So first, definitions. Let me start with the lowest hanging fruit here. Merriam-Webster defines regret as something that implies pain caused by deep disappointment, fruitless longing, or unavailing remorse. There's another word that kind of goes along with it. So, when I think of that sentence or that definition, it starts with it's caused by deep disappointment. And then we have to ask the question, so where does disappointment come from? And more often than not, disappointment comes from my constructed expectations of how things should go. So when somebody says, well, that was disappointing, nobody really ever pushes back and says, so what were you expecting? Sometimes people do. But see, that's the connection, is that our expectations tend to frame how we see things. Now, it is not as simple as not doing that. Understand that as humans, we adapt quickly and well because of our capacity to anticipate. And our anticipations feed our expectations, which means that if I go into a situation with a clear understanding of what will happen, then I can adapt when it doesn't go the way I expected it to. But regret is another beast altogether, if you want to put it that way, because it's disappointment. The other definition, or the other kind of aspect of this definition, is fruitless longing, which I found very profound, because longing is not the issue. It's the nature of the longing that is the issue. It's fruitless. Because in a lot of cases, our longing for something motivates us toward it or seeking to get it fulfilled through people or other things. And this is fruitless. And then the last one is unavailing. I would insert the word unabating remorse. And that's the could have, should haves, if only had, all of those sorts of things. Now, another perspective that it actually comes from a quote from the movie Gladiator, and I have always been fascinated by the conversation in that movie. It's very early in the movie. Marcus Aurelius has visited a battlefield where Maximus, who's the main character, is the commanding general, and there's this incredible victory for Rome, etc. And Marcus Aurelius shows up, and his son and daughter show up as well. His son is Commodus. Now, in real life history, Commodus is an extremely, almost as notorious as Nero. And there's an interaction between Marcus Aurelius with his son Commodus, because he recognizes that he is failing. He says to Maximus, he says, I am dying. And so he anticipates his son taking over as Caesar. And he says this to his son, which has always kind of pulled me up short, because he says, your flaws are my failures as a father. Now, that wasn't said with pity. It was said as a statement of fact. The problem is that the flaws in other people is so multifaceted, including my children, is so multifaceted, multivariable. There are so many things that contribute to those flaws rather than just me. But he owns it, Marcus Aurelius owns it, and says, those are my failures as a father. And quite honestly, between you, me, and the hedge post fence, wherever that is, I get that. I get that entirely. As a matter of fact, that's exactly why it pulls me up short, because it strikes at the very core of what I have been over the last 4 or 5 weeks struggling with and wrestling with. Is the things that I see in my kids are a reflection of of my failings. I wouldn't say failures, but my failings, the things that I could have done, what maybe should have done. I didn't do them. And their flaws now show and point to the things that maybe let's just say, for example, I could have done them. Let's say I did. And the reality of every parent is I was doing the best I could. I didn't set out to be a bad parent. No parent does. But there's always things in the present that point back to our past. And so the idea of regret is a ever-present pain in, I think, a lot of people's lives. I think this plays a part in even our spiritual formation, to connect it up with what we're talking about. Because in a lot of cases, our decisions about how I go about conducting my relationship with God has a lot to do with avoiding regret or trying to correct regret or to substitute regret, or whatever that would be. And so the irony is that when it becomes so clearly at the center of the target of my spiritual formation and of my life, then I am now completely enslaved by it. So where do people go? I mean, how do we move beyond that? I don't think we're doomed just to live with regret. I think we have to do something with regret. And so, I've heard one speaker refer to something about the phrase, well, conduct life in terms of from now on. And while that sounds wonderful, while that sounds motivational, it doesn't account for the power or the poison of our memories. Because God designed us to learn, and because He designed us to learn, we have memories. And those memories inform how we go about learning things. And those memories are also the very thing that is a poison leading us to looking back and saying what I could have done, and then holding that as a standard for convicting me now. That you pick your poison, literally and figuratively, of the things that have happened in your life, the things that you've chosen to do. And maybe you knew, maybe you didn't know. And the interesting thing about regret is it's so multifaceted that I can apply it anywhere. And my capacity for memory, not only to see into the future, that's a capacity as well, but to look into the past and then rewrite and refashion it in light of what I should have, could have done. Now I'm already convicted. Better yet, now I'm already condemned. And that opens the door for something that I talk a lot about in terms of shame. Because all of us have things we regret that we've done. We all have it. I don't know a single human that doesn't. Now, we can inoculate ourselves against it and say it doesn't really matter. That's been forgiven. That I've heard plenty of Christians. It's covered by the blood of Jesus. I get all that, but it still doesn't account for what our memories do. Now I can do something about those memories, and the solution is not self-forgiveness. Most people think, well, I just need to forgive myself. No, you don't. It can't be done. Because you're appealing to a judge that's already condemned you namely. So the whole idea of living from now on, our memories have the power to contaminate our present and poison our futures. Because suddenly it becomes a motivational force for what we move into and how we engage our relationships. As a matter of fact, in some respects, it actually tempts us into thinking even contractually. Because if I am continually in a state of regret, continually in a state of self-deprecation, then it leads us back to a longer conversation I had in a previous podcast of talking about quote unquote deserving good, or can I experience good? And the interesting thing about regret is it steals our capacity to enjoy good, because it always puts one word into our conversation, into the internal narrative, and it's like, this is wonderful, this is a great thing, I enjoy this, and then the word comes, but, and then regret. Well, I did this, I did that, I should have done that, I could have done that, and what happened to the good that I was just relishing? It's gone. See, when we talk about how do I live with regret, most solutions point to resting on pure willpower, just like the phrase that I just said about from now on. But how do we do this in the face of resurfacing memories and reminders like I'm just describing? And the one thing that never really occurs to us is to lean into it, is what some people would call it. I have a principle. I call it the kiss your monster on the nose principle. And when we say live with it, it usually translates into being tyrannized by it. So the question then is part of this, and I'll come back to the kiss your monster on the nose in a second, but part of does regret or sorrow exist? Yes, of course it does. We can look back and say, I could have or I should have. And either it becomes a motivational force for the next opportunity I have, or it becomes a bank account of condemnation that continues to grow within me. And Paul kind of knew that we were going to go this way, because he says himself, there is now no condemnation for those in Christ Jesus. That's a statement of fact. But it also then has all of this other stuff about, so being in Christ frees me from that condemnation. But what does that look like in everyday life? How do I live that way on a day-to-day, hour-by-hour basis? And let me go back to the principle of what I called the kiss your monster on the nose, and what that means. And this is a story. I can put a link, or you can Google it, because you'll be able to find it on the web, called Kiss Your Monster on the Nose. And as the story goes, there's a little girl who lives in a village far from the big city, and the village is nestled in a beautiful kind of sunlit valley surrounded by tall snow-capped mountains. And as she grows older, she begins to hike in the foothills, and she becomes a teenager, and she keeps asking her parents if she could go over the mountain to the other side of the mountain to see her grandparents. And at first her parents are very worried. They're really not up for that idea at all. But she persisted, as adolescents do, and after finally several months of this ongoing debate, her parents relented. And so they made her a backpack and filled it up, and they prayed over her and sent her on her safe journey. And she went in this trek over the mountains and made it through the first night alone, which was scary. Built a good fire, ate some of the sausage and cheese that she had, and got up the next morning, got going, had an early breakfast, and began the hike. And late in the afternoon, she reaches a fork in the path. And she didn't know which way to go, and she sat down and in this story, prayed for wisdom. And a few moments later, she heard this terrible, frightening noises coming from the direction of both paths that she's facing. And so her heart races, her palm sweats. Suddenly, from both paths, two monsters appeared. They were growling, gurgling, grumbling, snorting, all sorts of stuff. And the little girl grabs her backpack and begins to run back down the hill. And then something inside of her says, wait, not yet. Don't go. Other people have gone over these mountains and returned to tell about it. I'm going to go back and see what this is all about. So she stops, turns around, and the monsters had stopped right at the fork in the road. And something told her that they were trying to communicate with her somehow. So slowly and carefully, she walked back toward the monsters. And as she got closer, the monster guarding the path on her left said, take this path. It is much safer and much quicker. It's a path that will take you to see your grandparents tomorrow night. At that very moment, the monster guarding the other path on the right began to screech and howl this horrible, blood-curdling sound, and fire belched from its mouth and smoke poured from its nose, and the little girl was absolutely terrified. So she bolts toward the monster on the left. As she got closer, she noticed it wasn't as ugly as the other one, and it was definitely not as scary. And the closer she came to the one on the left, the louder the one on the right got. So she was so confused, she didn't know what to do. And the monster on the left spoke in a very soft voice and said, "Trust me, I'm not as ugly as that other monster, and I do not make those disgusting noises." And with that, the monster on the right screamed and gurgled and snorted and puffed even more. And she began to take the path to the left, fearful even more that if she didn't hurry, the other one would chase after her and tear her to shreds. So a few hundred yards down the path, she looked back to see if the other monster was chasing her. It wasn't. It was still at the fork in the path, but it was screaming and howling more and more. But it wasn't chasing her. And then she stopped, and the monster on the left path that was walking with her says, "Don't be a fool. I'm okay. You can walk with me." And then something inside of her told her to go back and take the right path. So she turns and extracts herself from the monster on the left path. Closer she gets to the fork in the road, the faster she runs, until she's running down the right path and up into the mountains. She didn't know why. She just had this idea and thought. And so she kept going, and at the last bit of twilight, she looked down the mountainside from where she came, and she could see the fork. And then she heard this thundering and rumbling and smashing and crashing, and straining in the darkness, she sees this huge section of the mountain break loose, and it hurtles down the left path below and obliterates the path. And she falls to the ground and cries, releasing all the anxiety and tension of all that she's been through. And then, just a few feet in front of her, appears the ugly monster who had been guarding the right path. And she looked up and gazed into its eyes, but it wasn't howling and grumbling at all. Its eyes seemed peaceful and deep, and its face had softened into a compassionate gaze. And without knowing why, the little girl jumps up and kissed the monster on the nose. And the monster blushes and smiles and reveals that it has a voice. And it says, "My name is Fear, and that other one's name is Destruction. If you run away from me without listening to what I have to say, you might end up avoiding something that is important to you. But if you listen to me just right and learn to make friends with me, then you will have wisdom. As for the monster guarding the left path, no matter how attractive it seems on the surface, nothing good ever comes from destruction." Well, the little girl finished her journey, got to visit her grandparents, got back safely home in her own village, and as the story goes, the parents noticed something very different about her. She was a young woman now who had learned to make friends with her fear instead of being paralyzed or destroyed by it. And that's the story. That is what I refer to as the principle of kiss your monster on the nose. Regret is a form of fear, a fear that I will make the mistake again, a fear that history will repeat itself. And when we say to live with it, it isn't to be tyrannized by it, but to figure out a way to learn from it. Can we review the events of the past? Of course we can, but the conclusions that we make of those events are the things that lead to regret. We can review the events. I live here in Denver, and for a long time we had a Hall of Fame quarterback by the name of Peyton Manning, and he was well known for looking at a lot of tape of all of his games and how he played. He didn't look at it to condemn himself as a quarterback. He looked at it as a means of becoming a better one. See, sorrow and regret can either empower us or paralyze us. It can energize us or enervate us. The question is how do we move from paralysis to actual power? And it lies in our willingness to learn from the things that have happened and resist the temptation to come to the conclusion, therefore I am a failure. Therefore I am condemned. Not easy. It is not easy. We are well practiced at coming to the same conclusion every time. It's really pretty remarkable how uncreative we are. We always end with the same conclusion. So when Paul then says, now therefore there is no condemnation, we have to find some way, I have to find some way of bringing the way that I handle my thoughts, and they're not just thoughts, they're conclusions. And the conclusions are what are deadly. So what I do with those and how do I align them with, instead of condemnation, there is construction, continued construction of living this life and being an active participant in my own spiritual formation. I'm called to participate in it, not to be a victim to it. And that same thing is a key. So I think the key, just to like I said, cultivate. The key would be acceptance and trust. Acceptance plays to our greatest fears. Because if I accept something, I'm afraid that it will never go away. And that same thing is the principle of kissing your monster on the nose, is she made friends with her fear, and it may or may not have gone away, but she developed wisdom. And that's what we miss because we're not willing to accept the life that we have and the people that we have in it and the people that we are and that we have developed to be. And that acceptance interferes with even our ability to grow. So one last thought, and something that I say, and you'll probably hear me say again on the podcast, and I'm sure the students that are listening will be reminded of something of this that I've said many times, and that is, I cannot change that which I won't accept. And that, too, is the key. It isn't to condemn regret. Regret can be redeemed to become my participation in my growth. And that's what we're called to do. Well, thanks so much for joining me. That passage or that topic is one that is just pulling back the veil so that you can see the person that does this podcast. I'm walking the path just like everybody else is. I'm just one beggar showing other beggars where the bread is, and so there are things that we can learn together, and I will share my own experiences, and if that's helpful, I pray that it will be. If you have questions, you can, of course, DM me on Instagram. And subscriptions, if you want to subscribe, please follow us on the website at drmitsch.com and follow us on Instagram at the Psych Monologues and Facebook, ray.mitch, and LinkedIn, drmitch. All the places that you can follow what's going on the website and other things that will be coming up. I just finished an interview with a senior here at CCU that's doing a podcast and talking about a variety of issues, and that no doubt will be published onto the website for you to see. So if you subscribe on the website, you will be able to be notified when new content goes up. As far as the podcast is concerned, you can certainly subscribe or follow us on Spotify, Stitcher, iTunes, Podbean, all the platforms that you would normally use to or listen to podcasts. You can find us there as well. I also mentioned last time, and I'll mention it again, we're going to be providing a second silent retreat for alums from CCU. That is on the date of May 19th through the 22nd, so you can check that out. I added on the CCU drop down on the website prospective dates. Well, not dates, but opportunities to register for our retreat in the fall of 22 and the spring of 23. So they're there for pre-registration. If you're interested and you want to go, hit that link up, and you can engage it in that way to do that. Finally, if you want to partner with us to continue to grow the scholarship fund and the base of making it possible for us to put on these silent retreats, you can do so by your tax-deductible gift for our silent retreats. You can do that by going to the website and find the drop-down menu under CCU for silent retreats, and there's a link at the very bottom to be able to donate. You can donate one lump sum, or you can donate by ongoing gifts, and any and all of that is deeply, deeply appreciated. If you prefer to make a checkout, you can do that. Address the envelope 1615.tv, P.O. Box 1777, Castle Rock, Colorado 80104. You make the checkout to 1615.tv as well. It's a partner for us that allows us to make it possible for donors to get a tax deduction for their gifts to what we're doing with the silent retreat. So that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. Love ya. Later. Bye.